This is episode 706 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Daniel Higbie. He is a businessman here in the city of Albuquerque and runs a group that is a bunch of faith-driven entrepreneurs and investors here in New Mexico. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Daniel.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Now, before we get into the faith-driven entrepreneurship, want to hear a little bit about yourself. Of course, I know you a little bit because your son was an intern at the Rio Grande Foundation.
That's right.
He's also a student at Hillsdale. How's Gabe doing?
Well, he's getting ready, I think, to go into a economics final, probably right now.
All right.
So he's doing great. And of course, that's my alma mater as well. So I love Hillsdale.
All right. Well, briefly describe why Hillsdale is unique. Of course, a lot of people are familiar with Hillsdale. They kind of associate it with a conservative institution of higher learning, but Hillsdale's gotten kind of a boost in terms of free advertising recently because of this whole battle with the Harvard University taxpayer funds for them and the Trump administration
Correct.
working to cut them off. That's one of the unique things about Hillsdale. So why don't you briefly mention where is it and kind of some of the specific things that they do differently up there?
Yeah. So Hillsdale College was founded in 1844. It's in Hillsdale, Michigan. So it's in the tri-state area. And it's famous for not taking a dime of government money. And the reason that they do that is because, if you take a cent, then all of a sudden you are allowing the government to come in and control what you say, what you teach, etc. So they always were ruthlessly private and independent in the best way, and it's because they wanted to focus on teaching the truth, as best they can. And they've in the last few months, especially, there's been a number of things that have brought them into the news, but one of them was really interesting. Well, actually two. One, I heard a podcast from one of the top professors in Columbia, and he named Hillsdale as and he named it directly as probably one of the top 5 schools in the nation for true free speech. And related to that, there was another article a few months ago by FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And they actually, they rated Hillsdale very highly, but they actually dropped them in the rankings because Hillsdale insisted on civil discourse, right? And according to the main dictates of FIRE, right, you should be able to say anything you want, be as emotional or angry as you want, right?
Right.
Or mean as you want. And Hillsdale has this wonderful policy of mutual respect and civil discourse that they hold pretty strongly. That's one of the things that we love about them. But it was just funny that FIRE kind of, ranked them down a little bit because they didn't let kids just, fly off the handle. But it's very, very rigorous. It's a very rigorous school. They have the highest standards, and their motto is "Strength rejoices in the challenge," which these days is very unusual.
Nice.
And so they're graduating many, many leaders.
And you run a business in Albuquerque called St. James Tea Room, which my daughters enjoy greatly. I personally have never been. No,
you should come, Paul.
I'm happy to do it, but definitely it's more orientated towards the ladies in terms of having the little, I don't know what you call them, appetizers, what I call them, but anyway, it's a lovely thing, and they really enjoy it. So you can say anything you want about it, but we'll just leave it there because I've not been. I hate to
Well,
talk about things I don't know anything about directly.
well, honestly, over the last, I don't know, probably in the last, we turned 25 years this year, and over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, it's 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 definitely not just for the ladies. In fact, the whole purpose of the tea room is to provide an experience that helps people connect, right? It just happens to have, the highest quality food and tea, but ultimately, for the majority of our clients, that's not the biggest thing. It's the opportunity to connect with people. So you have 2 hours that are totally uninterrupted that you can really connect with someone in a deeper way. And what's funny is that we find that I remember reading the book on Starbucks. And it was talking about how when they did internal surveys in Starbucks, the average stay was about 45 minutes in Starbucks, and 67% were at Starbucks alone. And what's interesting is we did internal surveys of our own company, and we found that generally it takes about 45 minutes, the same amount of time, to get through all the normal pleasantries, how are you? How are your kids? And start to go deeper. So if you never stay longer than 45 minutes, you never go deeper. And so this is an experience that allows people to do that. And the hardest thing is people get to where they get so comfortable and enjoy it that they don't want to leave.
That's definitely a business model challenge for certain enterprises. But we are here mostly with you to talk about a group of faith-driven entrepreneurs and investors. And this is currently here in Albuquerque only, although I imagine it's a model that is not entirely unique to Albuquerque. It's something that could be done in other places, but you're working at meeting at Calvary Church, which is, of course, the one on Osuna.
Correct.
Uh, so, talk a little bit about just introduce this group and kind of who is it and what are you doing to advance entrepreneurship and investing?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been a member of Fellowship of Companies for Christ International for many many years, and about 7, 8 years, this new organization started up, kind of companion to that, and it's called the Faith Driven Entrepreneur, and they also have the Faith Driven Investor, and it's actually global. So it's all over the country and all over the world, and the quality of their videos is just fantastic, and they are as up to date as you can be. And so they have a number of video series, and so they basically take you through from start to finish, reframing your understanding of business. And it's for those people who are deeply faith driven. How do you run your company in a way that honors people and honors God?
So, you meet how often? Who are the people that, I mean, not specifically aside from yourself, but kind of what are we talking about? Weekly, monthly,
Yeah,
and what do you actually discuss or share?
yeah. So most of the time it's weekly, at least the class is, and that's a good cadence because you know it's primarily for business owners and entrepreneurs, right? Or those who want to be a business owner and an entrepreneur, and who care deeply about their faith. And so the question is, how do you put those two together? Are we supposed to keep them completely separate? Of course, the answer is no. And this is made even more important now, because of course I'm sure you've talked about all the last 2 to 3 years, the Supreme Court rulings, and how we were just listening to a lawyer, a national lawyer, Kelly Shackelford from First Liberty Institute, and he was saying that we actually, as business owners, have more freedoms to exercise their faith in their business than any time in the last 50 years, because of the Supreme Court rulings. Now, if you don't know the Supreme Court rulings, right, or if you don't know the law, then you'll probably still be operating under this idea that you need to button it up and because you'll be canceled or anything like that. But in reality, the law is very much on the side of religious freedom and your ability to exercise your faith as a business owner. And so that's part of it, but mainly we just get into the nitty gritty of understanding what does it mean to combine those two, without being heavy handed or breaking the law or anything like that.
So one of the things, and we sat down and talked a while back, and we talked a lot about specific challenges facing New Mexico and New Mexico businesses and how they are driven by deep cultural influences and historical events and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have an elevator speech or some kind of, kind of set the table here for why New Mexico tends not to have Fortune 500 companies, why
Yeah.
the Jeff Bezoses and Bill Gates isn't, obviously they all have their own personal reasons, but why didn't Amazon or Microsoft really take off here in New Mexico? What are some of the unique challenges culturally, in addition to the public policies that Rio Grande Foundation talks about extensively
Yeah.
here in New Mexico to entrepreneurs and businesses?
Yeah. So this started about 4 years ago, probably late 2020, where a group of pretty high profile business people, we all got together and we just started talking about, what can we do, in New Mexico, and what is the source of this? And I had a very good friend who recommended a book called Blood and Thunder, which I would recommend to everybody. If you want to understand New Mexico, I would highly recommend Blood and Thunder. It's the story of Kit Carson, and he comes in and out of New Mexico. But it gives probably one of the greatest cultural understandings of New Mexico history, without getting too much into the weeds. And ultimately, based on these conversations, we realize that New Mexico struggles with three. We call them spirits, but you can call them deeply ingrained cultural beliefs that are so deeply ingrained they're part and parcel with the New Mexican people. And those three, the first one is a scarcity or a poverty mentality. The second one is a mentality of control, or a spirit of control, and the third is an orphan spirit. And so let me go into what those mean. I mean, this goes back in history. We're not talking 50 years. We're talking 250, 300 years. In our group, we've got a gentleman whose family comes from Acoma Pueblo, and he was explaining to us about the history in light of this, and it was just absolutely fascinating. So New Mexico, actually Santa Fe in particular, was always the end of every road. It was the end. It
Right.
was the, if you were coming from out east, you stopped at New Mexico between, at Santa Fe, because between Santa Fe and, California, right, there was nothing,
Right.
just wilderness.
So that's the Santa Fe Trail,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
I've read Blood and Thunder too.
Yeah,
I highly
yeah.
recommend it as well. So
Yeah.
Santa Fe Trail is that one
Yeah.
from east to west.
Right. And so, but it also, coming up from Mexico, that was like the end, coming down.
Camino Real,
Right.
the
And
the Royal Road.
so you have this place that is the end of the world, right? And I'm talking, historically, in the
Sure.
1800s. And then you add in all the history of the conquistadors, of, the Mexican government coming up, of the Navajos. People don't realize the impact of the Navajo Nation, which was extremely powerful. And there were decades there where the Navajos, the raiding Navajos, would come and take 60 plus percent of all the crops and food and sheep in New Mexico and take it back to Cañon de Chile, which is their home. It's on the border of Arizona and New Mexico. So what this created over time was this extreme like poverty mentality, right? There's not enough. There's not enough. Everything is scarce, and so you need to hoard whatever you can. You need to enjoy it while you can, and not think ahead. And what scarcity does is it basically steals vision, but it also makes people think very short term. So, so for example, what does that mean? Well, if you come to the legislature and you say, "Hey, we've got a $40 million project, right? It'll take 10 years to really become fruitful, but when it does, it's going to be huge." No, we're not interested in that, right? It needs to have immediate benefits, or we're not going to do it. So there's just this very, very, you know, short-term focused mentality, and of course, this poverty mentality affects everyone. It even affects me. We could go into that later. But then you have, the result of that is this idea of is there's so much risk. There's so much poverty that I need to get myself in a place where I can control it, right? I can, you know, get into a leadership position where I can take as much as I can for me and my own, and then, you know, while I have, get it while the getting's good,
Right.
and control as much of the formula as you possibly can. And that comes out in many different ways. And of course, the orphan spirit is this idea that no one is coming, right? There's no one that's going to come and help, right? There's no good father. And so it creates this extreme poverty mentality and this fear. So, and again, the point is not to be negative. The point is to understand that these are deeply ingrained cultural beliefs that go back hundreds of years. And if we think that, hey, we're just going to get a new administration and in 4 years we're going to change it all, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you're not going to change hundreds of years of cultural beliefs. It's going to take time. And the way that this all kind of works its way out is short-term thinking. For example, I know the gentleman who was in charge of the team that tried to get the Tesla Gigafactory here.
Right.
And I remember talking to him one time, and he said, ultimately it came down to that short-term mentality. Like, well, we're going to have to give up tax benefits. We're not going to gain right away. And then it also came down to right to work. And
Yeah.
as a result, it went to Nevada.
Yeah.
So, but it comes out in many other ways. We're critically underbanked, for example. This
Well,
person.
there's a suspicion, and certainly, I would say the Hispanic community is known for a suspicion of traditional banking. I'm not, I've just seen data showing that.
Absolutely.
And Hispanics are obviously a very broad demographic, and it may not apply to all different groups within the Hispanic culture, but that is something that statistically is
Well, and again,
true.
this is where history helps, because there's a reason for that. And when you understand the history, you realize, okay, that's kind of legit. And it's because, throughout New Mexican history, you had these big, powerful entities that would come in and take everything and then leave, right? And so that's why now, you can. I've heard stories of billionaires that have tried to come into New Mexico and said, "Yeah, we're going to invest in New Mexico. It's going to be great." And they are run out of New Mexico, absolutely frustrated because they can't get anything done, because of this fear of outsiders. So with the banking industry, you just take that further. The person that I was talking to last night, they were saying that New Mexican banks take in probably, I think it was about $7 billion in receipts a year, and they probably lend $1 billion to New Mexico. The rest of it goes out of New Mexico, right, to the major financial centers, right? Because they are looking for the most efficient returns on capital. And to do that, you send it to LA, New York, San Francisco, right, Atlanta, right? The big capital centers, which then can leverage that and take it. The system itself, generally, the way that it works to create efficient returns, um, it will siphon, funds, capital away from New Mexico to get easier returns somewhere else. And so that's the bigger banks. The bigger banks, it goes straight out. But with the smaller banks, for example, there's also this fear of risk, and I think those three things come into play as well, because there's the person that I was talking to said that there isn't a $50 million deal anywhere in New Mexico. Maybe oil and gas, but in anything else, and that's something that, like, when you go to Atlanta and it's totally different.
Right.
So again, it's just it helps me to understand. Okay, there are legitimate cultural, historical reasons. And when you understand that, first of all, it gives you a little more grace, right?
Mhm.
And you understand people, and then you can start to work with that. Okay, how do we change that over time? And it will take time.
So obviously, Rio Grande Foundation operates much more in uh, the political and policy world, and what you're talking about is history and culture, and they obviously connect in a very profound way. And I totally understand what you said when it comes to one governor's term in office. And, of course, it is worth noting that no Republican, at no time since 1930, so almost 100 years, has the Republican Party had the governor, House, and Senate all lined up together.
Right.
So there is a mentality, at least supporting Democrat, in obviously the Democratic Party, as has the Republicans, have evolved immensely over that nearly 100-year time period. But I would broadly say that New Mexico has been oriented, and what drove New Mexico to the Democrats was the New Deal. Of course, the New Deal, FDR pumping a lot of money into New Mexico from the outside and building tangible things. Now, there's that. There's recently, of course, we've had massive oil and gas surpluses, and rather than cutting taxes, bringing new businesses in, allowing people to share in that prosperity, the government has largely hoarded it all, and that fits in with one of the things you
And that's
talked
the
about.
spirit of control,
Yeah,
right? Right. You don't know what's going to happen, and so we need to hoard it and control it. And there's almost no understanding of a rising tide floats all boats.
and there's a jealousy factor as well, especially when it comes to outsiders with money coming in. There's kind of what just jealousy slash suspicion,
Yeah. Yeah.
that I think there is a kind of antipathy towards, well, first and foremost, New Mexicans have it out for Texans, just as a general rule. Let's face it. I mean, in Texas, there's nobody on the planet that is more confident of their state and its positive attributes. I mean, you go to I once went to a hotel in Austin for a conference, and there were probably images of the Texas flag over 100,000 times in this place. I mean, it was just bananas. Now, New Mexicans love their flag and love their state, but they don't have that kind of overt patriotism that Texas has.
They do, but there's also, again, you get into history. So I'll say two things. Number one,
Sure.
that idea, to go back to the New Deal. I totally agree. That changed everything. What you had is you had a huge amount of federal money that finally came into New Mexico, but it was geared toward the labs, right? We needed to create an atomic bomb, right? We had World War II,
Sure.
and it created this huge apparatus that was government funded. And so, again, when we talk about New Mexico has probably never truly experienced a private economy, the type of private economy where you have, totally free investment, capital coming in and out that's totally outside of the government's purview, right?
Right.
They've never experienced that because the biggest entities have always been the government.
And when they do bring in private sector, I'll use the term in air quotes, private sector. Oftentimes, those private sector players are coming for the benefits, the specific tax exemptions, or money that is handed to them directly. And I'll
Right.
say the film industry is a perfect example of that. Eclipse Aviation, when that was here, and I remember that back in the Richardson administration.
Yeah.
Even Intel, which is much more, I think, oriented towards the true private sector, didn't pay property taxes for 25 years in that facility.
Right. Well, and the reason that Intel came in the first place was because of, do you remember the base closings fear? Was
Yeah,
it the 80s, right?
right.
That's the only reason why Intel was allowed to come in, because they were so afraid that we were going to lose Kirtland, that it was going to be closed, that they started thinking, okay, what can we do? We need to get in serious business investment. And there was that small window of time before we found out Kirtland was not on the chopping block, and Intel got in, and then the window closed, boom, and nothing else came in after that. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for not having a truly private economy, and a lot of that is, again, historical. But on the that idea of, Texans being proud of their state. There's real historical reasons for that, and there's also real historical reasons for New Mexico's people struggling with that, and that's because, again, with every, the conquistadors, the Mexican government, the Navajos, right? Um, it was all these external entities telling, the people, you're not worth investing in, you're not worthy, we're just going to take. And so there's a real suspicion of outsiders. And just a note to anyone trying to do that, the way that you do that is you get, if you're an outsider and you want to invest in New Mexico, you get a very trusted insider in New Mexico to be your agent. Like, you have to do that, because if you think you're going to make it on your own, you'll get so frustrated, because you'll find that there'll be a little county office that won't approve, your license, that you desperately need to go drill or do whatever you need to do, because they don't trust you. So getting that insider is hugely important.
And let's talk about oil and gas briefly, because, of course, New Mexico's been an oil and gas state since, not quite till 1930, but post-war. It now, though, has become the dominant feature of New Mexico's economy. We have all
Absolutely.
this money for a state our size, and yet that money, first and foremost, there's a lot of kind of overblown anti-oil and gas mindset around the rest of New Mexico. So you've got Southeast, which in many ways, culturally and philosophically, is more orientated towards Texas. And then you have the majority of the population resides in areas there where there's a lot of suspicion about oil and gas. But of course, that oil and gas has brought in much money and resources to the point where politicians, like the Senate Finance Committee chair, says, we're not a poor state. Well, we act like a poor state, but talk
Correct.
about
It's that
how
poverty
that oil and
mentality.
gas approach and that resource is used or not used. And ultimately, what we're getting towards is how can we get beyond those kinds of hangups? But briefly, I
Yeah.
do want to talk about
Well,
oil and
I'm
gas.
I'm I'm certainly not an expert in oil and gas at all. That's
Obviously,
not my business. But
but the largesse that it's provided the state, you don't see it in
oh
the
yeah,
streets. You don't see it in
you
the
don't.
roads.
And again, if you think about it, those three, deeply cultural ingrained beliefs, those spirits, right? They continue to work. There's not enough. There's not enough. Even with $6 billion coming in from oil and gas, or however many it's coming in, it's not enough. We need to preserve it. And then, of course, there's that opportunistic, which is, you know hey, I'm in a position of power. I'm gonna use it to take what I can. And I think that probably happens more than we think. But oil and gas is a very good thing for New Mexico. I mean, it's a product that the world needs, and we want to support it if we can. Sure, we want to make sure that it's done well and done in an environmentally healthy way. But we need oil and gas very, very much. It just needs the mindset of a lot of the leaders and legislators needs to change to one of an abundance mentality. And it's probably too new. I mean, how many years has it really been giving us that surplus?
Eh, about well 6 or 7. Really, the MLG administration is where it's been super strong. But there's
Right.
no way that that industry can continue to grow. Just the law of numbers. You can't have that kind of growth
Correct.
for the very long. It will level off at some point, and obviously, sometime deep into the future, it will ultimately decline. Although, the argument is that, well, will we continue to find new
Well,
opportunities,
hope so.
or will it start to decline right in the Permian
Well,
Basin?
and
So,
that's probably what you've just described is probably their exact mentality,
right,
right? And so, we don't know what's going to happen. This may not last, so let's save all of it and not spend any of it on the people, right?
right.
So that makes a lot of sense,
And not spend it, I just want to clarify,
right?
return it to the
Return
people,
it to the people.
because the idea of let's get the private sector going and move it in a more positive direction. So using this resource that we have available to us right now, that's certainly not something you see in
No,
Santa Fe.
no,
So,
you don't. I wish they would, and I would encourage them all to really think about that, because yeah, if you have a resource and it's not going to last forever, you want to invest. You
right.
want to invest in something that is going to really last for a long time. And that's the one thing that businesses can do that no other entity can do, is that if you create a reproducible product or service that the world needs, you can keep it going, forever,
Right.
right? For hundreds of years, right? There are businesses that have been around for a long time because it's a need, right? And again, this goes into an understanding that of the true purpose of business, which a lot of people don't understand, I think. Um,
Well, feel free to, just kind of elaborate on whatever, because I'm ultimately getting towards, is it a philosophical understanding? How do we change it? Obviously, your group, and you can feel free to share more details about that. Maybe if somebody's interested in participating in that, if you want to,
yeah,
whatever you want to share. But uh, ultimately, what I want to talk to you about in the final, 10 or so minutes we have together is, how do we get beyond that self defeating mentality? And
yeah,
I know it's not. This is hundreds of years in the making. I don't
absolutely.
expect you to be able to come up with, oh, well, it's simple, this, and this. And, where do we go, though?
Well, I'll tell you the greatest understanding that I have gotten in the last 2 or 3 years that has really been a revelation is a new understanding of business and the types of business. So this argument that I'm going to try to briefly lay out is incredibly effective, and it's effective. It doesn't matter if you're in a faith community or if you're not in a faith community. If you want to talk to students coming out of UNM who are very socialistic, right? This works as well. And the understanding is that there are, because normally you have a socialistic, believing student that comes out of UNM, and they'll say business is bad, right? That's generally where they start. And when I talk to them, what I talk to them about is, well, there's actually not one type of business. There's actually three. And the first one is exploitative, right? And those are the businesses you're talking about. There are businesses that are created by people that are just out there to take. And nobody dislikes those businesses more than the good entrepreneurs and good business people that are out to solve a real need in society. So we all know exploitative businesses. We don't need to talk much about that. But the second
Well,
level,
can you name one? Because I'm of the opinion that generally speaking, uh, willing participation. I mean, yeah, you can talk about mining or even oil and gas, and and people on the left would often say, "Oh, those are exploitative because you're exploiting the environment to get what you want." But uh, do you have any examples that you're willing to
well,
talk
any
about?
vice businesses,
Okay,
I
fair
mean,
enough.
I guess I'm talking more about the people side,
Okay,
right? Which is a lot of times what they're talking about as well, right? They exploit people,
right.
right? It's the man hurting the little guy who's struggling, right? And the idea that business owners, are only out for themselves. And I know some that are, but honestly, they're rare. Um, so the second level of business, like the second type, I call it the second level, is ethical business, and that's where you have a lot of business people that this is the place where you normally live, right? Where you try to create win-win situations where the client or your customer wins, you also win. You give, right? You give something of value, you solve a need in society, and it's worth people to pay you for it. Right. And that creates a business. And out of that, you can pay your people, pay your inputs. And then if you do such an excellent job, you may have something left over, and that's called the reward of profit, right? So again, this idea of ethical business, you try to create win-win situations and you do the right thing, right? That's the second level. But what's amazing is that so many people, especially Christians and faith people, they think of that as the top level, and it's not. So there's a third one, and that is what we call redemptive business. And this is an idea that anyone can get behind, including a socialist student coming out of UNM. And that's the idea that the business you in the day to day, a lot of times you exist in the ethical frame, but your ultimate goal, if you switch to redemptive business, redemptive entrepreneuring, is creative restoration through sacrifice. Now, it sounds really scary, a lot of times when people hear it. But of course, as every entrepreneur knows, entrepreneuring is sacrifice, right? You're going to sacrifice one way or another. You might as well do it for something good. And so focusing on creating a business that solves a need in society and has a great purpose, but that also works to creatively restore society. And that's a whole different level. And let me give you an example of this. Because a lot of times people get scared at that. Like, well, you're in business to sacrifice. No, it just means that you have a greater calling, that your business is not just for yourself, right? And it's not just to create win-win situations. There may be some times where it's worth it for the business to sacrifice a little bit, for you as the business owner to sacrifice for the greater good. And I mean, it's a real simple, idea, but I love New Mexico. I have a giant chip on my shoulder for New Mexico. New Mexico is written on my heart. My burden is for New Mexico. I love New Mexico. I love New Mexican people. Um, but honestly, if I wanted to make a lot more money, I could move to Texas, where it has I could move my business to Texas, where it has much less taxes, much less costs,
Right,
right? I don't know how much more I probably could make. It would be a lot. It would be six figures every year.
right.
So I am sacrificing to stay here in New Mexico, but I'm not really, because I love New Mexico. I don't want to, I don't want to move my headquarters anywhere else. But it is. I mean, if I was being purely non-loyal, just focusing on efficiency, and I know business people who've done this, where they just say, you know what, I can get better returns in Texas. I'm gone, and they move to Dallas. You
Right.
know, but that's not focusing on creative restoration. You can have such a huge effect by creating an excellent business and growing it out of New Mexico, and then repatriating that revenue and those profits back into New Mexico. Yeah, you might sacrifice a little bit of more taxes, but you're creating a greater New Mexico. Isn't that a worthy cause? So this is redemptive business. It's a completely different frame of mind. And if we had more business owners that thought that like that and thought about creating a greater private economy, it would change New Mexico. I firmly believe it.
Well, boy, we're getting up against the time, and so
Deep ideas,
this
huh?
concept is really important. But before we conclude, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, give me a path, if you will, because ultimately, you know, and I'm not going to criticize the idea of redemptive business, but on the other hand, I don't know that you're going to find a large enough group of entrepreneurs and business owners who are willing to sacrifice a significant amount of profit. Sure, maybe a smaller amount or some amount. There's ultimately, we all live by the motto of the gambler. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, because at some point the pain and the loss of the financial side of things becomes overwhelming on the ledger against the profits and the potential success for that business. And then you throw in crime, you throw in the
Oh, sure.
schools of New
I
Mexico
totally
and having
understand.
kids and standard of life, all these other things. So you can wind up overdoing it on the sacrifice thing. But
You
is
can.
is that enough to turn New Mexico around, or do you really think that enough business people, whatever, can do this thing in order to turn New Mexico around, or is it just another kind of aspect of business?
No, I really do. Uh, First of all, I totally sympathize with that because, it can be very discouraging.
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
been discouraged many, many, many times. But ultimately, what are you loyal to? Are you loyal to yourself, right? And that scarcity mentality. And I need to get as much for me and mine. And therefore, I'm going to go to Texas or I'm going to go to Colorado. Or are you truly committed to, New Mexico? And I'll tell you, I'm truly committed, like all the way. So there's something in you, I think. But what would change it is having, if we had 20 companies that grew up from the ground up, that made it not just in New Mexico, that made it regionally, nationally, internationally. If we could create companies that thought like this, but determined that they would keep their headquarters here, but we're going to grow and do excellent business all around the country and the world. If that happened, it would change New Mexico. Because if you go to Atlanta, right? Perfect example. What do you hear all the time? Chick-fil-A, Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, Chick-fil-A, Coca-Cola. It's on everybody's lips. It's like you can't even talk to someone from Atlanta without hearing that because they're proud of it, right? And I guarantee you we would have the same thing. So as far as a path forward, again, it's creating that private economy and doing it in a way that remains loyal to New Mexico. And I think if we were able to, to field, some of these companies and invest in them so that they can succeed, but stay in New Mexico, I think it would change a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Daniel. And by the way, when I think about Atlanta, I think about the Home Depot,
Oh yeah,
United
yeah,
Parcel
sure,
Service,
sure, absolutely.
Delta Airlines,
There's a lot.
which specifically moved there from, I believe, Louisiana or New Orleans because of the airport and whatnot.
Correct.
And I think of the motto they had in the '60s: "The city too busy to hate,"
Yeah.
because that was kind of the economic dynamo of the old South or the new South,
Right.
depending on how you talk about it. Well, last thing, if folks want to get involved in your faith-based entrepreneurship group, I'll just have you give your information, whichever
Yeah.
information you want.
Yeah. So Faith Driven Entrepreneur, they have groups, and you can actually go to their it's faithdrivenentrepreneur.org, and you can look up groups and find them. They also have conferences. They have a yearly conference that has a. We're going to do a watch party September 19th at Calvary. I'd highly recommend people. You can sign up for that on Faith Driven Entrepreneur, or just come and contact me, and I can give you some
And how do
information.
they?
Um, well, I mean, my business. So St. James Tea Room, you could probably just leave a message and contact me, and
Okay.
I can do what I can. But there are a lot of opportunities for people to learn about this. But probably the easiest would be to do. There's Fellowship of Companies for Christ International, and then there's Faith Driven Entrepreneur, and both of those you can go to the websites.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Daniel,
Thank
and
you.
appreciate your leadership and your optimism. And thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.